Hello, this is Mark with Evo Ballistics again. In this video I'll show you all about the weapon and ammunition database of the EB Mark I and how to use it. We'll begin with the weapon database here. To access the database on the dashboard, we press this weapon button here, and we can see this is all the technical information for the currently selected weapon. Right now we have the CZ-TSR, a sniper rifle in caliber 308, so 7.62x51, and we have some of the technical information about the barrel length here, twist direction, the barrel twist length. This is very important at a later stage. And then we have the barrel land and groove diameter, the number of grooves, and the barrel type. Of course, this is only for this specific weapon, and if we want to have a look at a different weapon, we have multiple ways to do this. First, we have this button up here, which gives us access to our full database. When pressed, we can see we have a whole lot of different weapons here that we can select from, all in alphabetical order. And each one has different, let's call it symbols at the back here. These are filter options. So right now we have a few different options here. One is the factory symbol. This means that this entry was done by us as the manufacturer. So this is already on every single EB Mark I that's currently available. Then you have this symbol with the little head here, the bust. That means that is an entry by the user themselves. So in this case, I have entered a 40mm test weapon in here. And finally, we have this ammunition symbol. This means that this specific rifle is chambered in the currently selected ammunition as well. And the way we can use these filter options is with the three buttons up here. So pressing the first button, we can see that now none of the manually entered rifles or weapons generally is now available here anymore. It's only the weapons that are input by us as the manufacturer. If we disable this and then activate the manual again, we can see that only weapons that we have manually input here are now available. Lastly, we can then select here the ammunition. That means that we now only have weapons available in the currently selected ammunition. And here we can see that we have also our CZ-TSR selected here already. Of course, we also have the option to search for a specific rifle. So let's say we are looking for an HK417. I can simply input HK, for example, here. And we can see, yes, we have multiple HK417s with the different barrel lengths available right here. Now, when going back, we are again with our currently selected rifle, the CZ-TSR. And then we see below that 5 different buttons here. On number 1, we currently have the CZ-TSR. And if we select number 2, we can see that we have now the Handle RS9. This is another sniper rifle, but in a different caliber. And these 4 buttons here, these labeled 1 through 4, are our quick selections. So I can manually select which rifles are displayed here. So on the one, when going back, it asks us if we want to create a new series, because of course we have already the correct ammunition selected for this. I won't do this now. But if I want to change my rifle, so we'll go back to the number 2 right now and select, let's say, the 417. I'm going to select first that I only want weapons in my current ammunition. And then we'll scroll down, find our HK417, and then select this. It will also ask again if we want to create a new series. Of course, we don't. So now we have this weapon selected on slot number 2. If I switch back to number 1, we still have our TSR, and now on number 2, instead of the RS9, we now have the 417 here. If we do not find our specific rifle that we're looking for, we can always add our own entries in here as well. For that, I simply press the plus button here. In that case, every single field now becomes blank, and I can manually input our weapon here. Everything from weapon name, this can be selected freely. The part number can be an additional information, but doesn't have to be entered. This could be anything from the serial number to a specific information about the weapon, whatever you would like to enter in here. Then we go down to the manufacturer, and this is not an area where you can just add any manufacturer that you like. Instead, you have a list of select ammunition or weapon manufacturers here, and we can select this. If you do not find your specific manufacturer, you can use the dash here, or there is also an unknown entry. So if we don't have our selected one, we simply use the dash here. Then we go down to the weapon type, which is just a very basic information about what kind of rifle or weapon it is generally. Even an undefined option is possible here. Then we come to the most important part, and that is the calibers. As you can see here, we have 3 different calibers that we can input here. This does not mean that a rifle with, let's say, 3 different types of the rifle with different barrels should be entered here. This is only for the same barrel. So, for example, if you have a pistol chambered in 9mm, most users know that you could, in theory, also use the 38 special ammunition. In that case, you would then first select the 9mm 9x19. And then we can also select here the .38 special here. And in that case, we can use the same ammunition in the same barrel. If you have a rifle, for example, that can be chambered in 308 or 6.5 Creedmoor, then you would have to input 2 different new weapons in here. But don't make the mistake of putting both calibers in here in that case. Because only if you have the correct caliber selected here and the same with the ammunition, then you can select both types of weapon and ammunition together. Now, the barrel length, of course, can be input freely. The same goes for the twist direction, left or right. Barrel twist length will also be already input, or rather, it will be already have a presetting based on the caliber that you have selected. So this is just the regular CIP information. If that is not standard, you can adjust it here accordingly. You can also see you have both the option to input it in inch or in millimeters. Depending on what you input, so let's say we're changing from the 250mm twist length to 300mm, you will see that the inches have immediately been adjusted as well. Then we see the land and groove diameters. These usually don't have to be adjusted and are based on the CIP data. And then we have the number of grooves. So in case that is a special barrel that you're using, you can input that information here as well. None of this information is currently being used for any calculations or anything. This is just reference information. Lastly, you can select the kind of barrel type, for which we have 3 different options. Option number 1 is the smoothbore barrel. Very rarely used, but for example for shotguns, this is what you would select here. Then you have your standard rifling. And lastly, we have the polygonal barrel type, which is less common, but especially in machine guns, this is becoming more and more common now. If you have a progressive twist rate, for example, you are starting with a 1 in 15-inch twist and going down to a 1 in 9-inch twist, you would only input the barrel twist length at the end. So from the 1 in 15 to 1 in 9, you would input the 9 inches right here, for example. This is how you would generally use this. Once you have finished your input, you would then press the save button, and the new weapon would be saved under the name that you have selected here and can then be selected. In this case, it would also immediately be saved under the 2 quick selection slot here. Now that we have selected the right weapon, we then go to the ammunition. This on the dashboard you simply access similarly to the weapon through this button up here. And here, as you can see, the layout of the screen is very similar. You also have the weapon, the ammunition name or specification right here at the top with the quick selection buttons and the list. And then we have our technical information about the ammunition here. So right now we have some S&B ammunition selected right here for the 308. That's why it was in the same caliber as the currently selected rifle. The part number, as you can see here, is just the regular number for the order number for the ammunition in this case, manufacturer, S&B or Sellier and below. Next up, material, copper lead, caliber, so this caliber, which of course there's only one here, needs to match exactly with the entry for the weapon. If this does not match, so if I switch it, for example, to the number 2 here right now, which is in 338, you immediately see up here that the weapon caliber is now not matching. And if we were to go back to the dashboard, we would not be able, so you can see here, the arming button is disabled. We are not able to arm the system and make a measurement because the weapon and the ammunition would just not fit together. So going back to the ammunition, we'll switch back to slot number 1. It will ask me immediately again if we want to create a new series. Since we're not actually shooting now, I'm going to press no again. And then we can see we have the caliber diameter. This is the actual diameter of the projectile, not the stated one. So for example, for the 308 Winchester, you always know that's the 7.62 by 51, but in reality the projectile diameter, so the caliber, is actually 7.85 millimeters for the projectile. And this needs to be entered very much correctly because this is a physical property of the projectile and needs to be correct for the calculations to make sense. Next up we have the weight of the projectile, both in grains and grams. And then we have a German-specific GEE, which is a distance that you would zero your hunting rifle in, for example. We didn't have an information here, so there is a 0 here. This is just an additional information that might be interesting for some shooters. On the right side, we then have some of the technical performance information. So for example, we have for this ammunition, the manufacturer states a muzzle velocity expected of 800 meters per second, which equates to about 3,600 joules of muzzle energy. We then have a BC, a ballistic coefficient, which is stated on the box of 0.239 for a G7 BC. That equates to a drag coefficient as muzzle velocity of about 0.32. Now, this information is what is based simply on what the manufacturer provides us with. We can then, if we scroll down a little bit here, we can then select a drawing, a technical diagram of the projectile itself. Because this projectile is actually a G7, the G7 is already selected here, but you could theoretically also select a different projectile. These G profiles are based on different shapes of projectiles. So starting with the G1, this is the initial standard that everyone used, but as you can see, this projectile doesn't really look like a long-range projectile that you would use for shooting at longer distances. The G2 is significantly longer than the G1 or even the G7 and is a lot of times used with very, very large projectiles. So you wouldn't expect this for a, let's say, 6.5 millimeter or a 7.62 300 caliber projectile. Next up we have the G5. As you can see, this is a much rounder nose. And then the G6, which doesn't have the bow tail that you expect usually from long-range projectiles. The G7 is the other standard that's currently being used on boxes. Then we have the G8, which is very similar to the G7 but doesn't have the bow tail. The GL, which is your standard large caliber hunting projectile. The GS, which is just a sphere, so just a ball ammunition. And the GL, or rather it's the GI in this case. This is an older version of the G1. Dimensionally, they are very, very similar, but they have very slightly different drag profiles. Finally, we also have the RA4, which is used generally only for the 22 long rifle projectiles. Depending on what kind of projectile you have, you can always select what kind of shape they have, and that will already adjust slightly the performance of the projectile at longer ranges. If you want to learn more about this especially, there will be a specific video on drag profiles and how these are used to generate your own ballistic coefficients and drop tables at extended ranges. And this is how you use the ammunition and weapon database on the EB Mark I.